Abandoned in the woods. The autumn air was sharp with the scent of pine and damp earth. Golden leaves swirled through the trees, carried by a restless wind that whispered secrets of change. Somewhere deep in those endless woods, a young woman stumbled forward, her breath trembling in her chest. Her shawl was thin, her shoes worn, and her eyes, once bright, now dulled with grief. Her name was Eliza Carter. Not long ago, she had been the cherished daughter of a farming family. But that was before the midwife's words had branded her as broken, before the whispers of neighbors turned into sharp accusations, and before her family's patience snapped into cruelty. "She cannot give us heirs," her father had spat, his voice cold as stone. "She'll be a burden to any man," her mother had sighed, turning her face away. And so, one bleak morning, they had led her into the woods under the pretense of gathering herbs. When Eliza paused to tie her shawl, they left her there, alone. She called out for them, running until her legs ached, but the only answer was the hollow echo of her own voice. By sundown, she knew, her family had abandoned her like an unwanted thing. Her knees buckled, and she sank to the forest floor. The stillness pressed on her chest. No future, no home, no love, only the cold stretch of night waiting to swallow her whole. Far from her despair, a cabin stood on the edge of a clearing where smoke curled from its chimney. Inside, the crackle of a fire mingled with the sound of children's laughter. Thomas Hale, a broad-shouldered lumberjack with weathered hands and a quiet strength, listened as his two children argued over who would help with supper. Since his wife's passing 2 winters ago, Thomas had kept his family afloat with long hours at the sawmill and the steady rhythm of the axe in his hands. Life was harsh, but his children, Clara, aged 10, and Samuel, just 7, kept light in his world. They were the reason he rose before dawn, the reason he pressed on when grief threatened to undo him. That night, after tucking them into bed, Thomas stepped outside to split kindling. The moon hung low, silvering the trees. He paused mid-swing, hearing something faint, like the sob of a child carried on the wind. Frowning, he set down the axe and strained his ears. Not a child, he realized after a moment. A woman. Eliza wandered through the woods, her shawl clutched tight, when 2 small figures emerged from the shadows. Clara and Samuel had woken early to fetch water from the creek and stumbled upon her. The girl's voice was soft but steady. "Miss, are you hurt?" Eliza turned, startled. In the children's wide eyes she saw not scorn, but curiosity, and something else she had nearly forgotten existed, kindness. Her lips trembled as she tried to speak, but the words caught. Tears rolled silently down her cheeks. Samuel tugged his sister's sleeve. "We should take her home. Pa will know what to do." Eliza wanted to protest, to say she wasn't worth troubling anyone, but her legs gave way beneath her. Clara reached out, steadying her. For the first time in days, Eliza felt the warmth of human touch that wasn't cruel or dismissive. "Come with us," Clara urged gently. "Our cabin's not far." When the children led her into the clearing, Thomas straightened from his work, axe in hand. His eyes narrowed as he took in the frail stranger draped in his daughter's arm. A woman, thin as a reed, her face pale and eyes rimmed red from crying. "What's this?" he asked, his voice deep and cautious. "She was in the woods, Pa," Clara explained quickly. "She looks so tired. Can we keep her here, just tonight?" Thomas set the axe aside and studied the stranger. Something in her posture, bent but unbroken, like a storm-scarred tree, stirred a memory of his own loss. She looked as though the world had decided she was disposable, and yet here she was, still standing. Eliza lowered her gaze, ashamed. "I don't mean to impose. I'll go if you want me to." But Clara tightened her grip on her arm, and Samuel's small voice piped up, "Please, Pa, don't send her away." The lumberjack exhaled slowly, rubbing the back of his neck. "All right," he said at last, his tone softening. "Come inside. No one should be out in the cold tonight." And so, with hesitant steps, Eliza crossed the threshold of the Hale cabin. She didn't know it then, but she had just stepped into the first place that might one day feel like home. The Lumberjack's promise. Morning broke gently, the light slanting through the pine trees and warming the rough-hewn walls of the Hale cabin. Eliza woke on a small cot near the hearth, wrapped in a quilt that smelled faintly of wood smoke and lavender. For a moment, she thought it was a dream, a warm place, children's laughter, the steady sound of someone chopping wood outside. But then the ache in her heart returned, reminding her that she had been cast away like unwanted kindling. Still, there was something different here. Something steady. Clara and Samuel bustled about, setting bowls on the table with the clumsy energy only children could manage. Clara spotted Eliza stirring and offered a shy smile. "Good morning, miss. We made porridge. Pa says you need food." Eliza sat up, her voice soft. "Thank you. You're very kind." Samuel beamed. "Clara did most of it. I just tasted it." Clara rolled her eyes, and Eliza found herself smiling, an expression she hadn't thought possible anymore. Thomas stepped inside moments later, his broad shoulders filling the doorway. He set down an armful of freshly chopped wood and gave Eliza a cautious nod. "Morning. Hope you rested some." "I did. More than I thought I could," she admitted, fingers tightening on the quilt. I owe you thanks." Thomas shrugged, scratching his beard. "Not much to thank. You needed a roof. We had one." But in his eyes, those steady, weather-worn eyes, she saw something more than practicality. He didn't ask questions right away, didn't pry, but there was no judgment there. Only a quiet patience, as though he knew that sometimes a soul needed space before words could be spoken. Days turned into weeks. Eliza intended only to stay a night, perhaps two, but the Hale children insisted she remain. Clara tugged at her skirts, begging for help with sewing. Samuel followed her like a shadow, eager to show her every hidden corner of the woods. And Thomas, though reserved, never once hinted that she should leave. Instead, he began to find her in small moments, kneeling by the hearth teaching Samuel his letters, mending Clara's dress with a precision that made the girl giggle, humming softly as she gathered herbs for supper. The cabin, once filled only with necessity and routine, now carried a warmth he hadn't realized was missing. But he also noticed the shadows in her eyes, the way she flinched when asked about her past. One evening, as the fire crackled low, Thomas finally asked the question he'd been holding. "Eliza, who left you out there?" She stiffened, fingers twisting in her lap. For a long time, silence hung between them. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she said, "My family. They decided I wasn't worth keeping." Clara gasped. "But why?" Eliza's eyes brimmed with tears. She tried to blink away. "Because I cannot give children. The midwife said I was barren, and so I was no use to them any more." The children stared, bewildered by such cruelty. Thomas's jaw tightened, his hands curling into fists. He thought of the neighbors who sometimes sneered at him for raising his children alone, of the way grief had left scars on his heart. But to cast away one's own flesh and blood simply because she couldn't bear more children? It made his chest burn with quiet anger. "You're worth more than what they told you," he said gruffly. "A family that can't see that doesn't deserve you." Eliza lifted her gaze, surprised by the conviction in his tone. No one had ever said such words to her, not her parents, not the neighbors, not anyone. The weeks stretched into months. Eliza began to belong, not just in chores or routine, but in spirit. She taught Clara to embroider flowers on scraps of cloth, showed Samuel how to gather berries without pricking his fingers, and discovered that her laughter blended seamlessly with theirs. Thomas, meanwhile, found his guarded heart softening. He would glance up from chopping logs to see Eliza hanging laundry in the breeze, her hair catching sunlight. He noticed the way she bent to comfort Clara after a scraped knee, or how Samuel fell asleep against her shoulder during story time. Each moment whispered a truth he was reluctant to admit. This woman, abandoned and broken, had become the missing piece of his family. Winter came early that year, snow draping the woods in white. One evening, a storm howled outside, rattling the shutters. Inside, the children huddled by the fire while Thomas repaired a broken chair. Eliza brought out a basket of mending and joined them, her needle flashing in the firelight. At some point, Clara curled into Eliza's side, drowsy. Samuel climbed into her lap, yawning. When Thomas looked up, he saw them all together, the children nestled against her as though she had always been theirs. The sight tugged at something deep within him. "Eliza," he said quietly, setting the chair aside. She looked up, startled by the seriousness in his voice. "I need to ask you something." Her heart thudded. "Yes. You said once you couldn't bear children. But—" he gestured toward Clara and Samuel, sleeping soundly against her. "I reckon they don't much mind. Truth is, neither do I. They've already taken to you, and so have I." Eliza's breath caught. "Thomas, I—" He leaned forward, his expression steady, unwavering. "I'm not a man of fancy words. I can't promise an easy life. But I can promise you won't be cast aside here. You'll have a place, a home. And if you'll have us, maybe more." Her vision blurred with tears, but this time they were warm, not bitter. "You'd truly want me, knowing I cannot give you more children?" Thomas reached across the firelight and took her hand, rough and calloused but gentle. "You've already given us more than you know. You've given this house laughter again. You've given my children a mother's love. And you've given me hope." For the first time in her life, Eliza felt wholly seen, not as broken, not as less, but as cherished. Spring arrived, and with it, new beginnings. On a bright morning, with wildflowers blooming in the clearing, Thomas stood beside Eliza before a small gathering of neighbors and friends. Clara clutched Eliza's hand proudly, while Samuel tugged at Thomas's sleeve, impatient for the words to be spoken. The vows were simple, but they needed no grandeur. When Thomas looked at Eliza and said, "You are my family," she knew it was the truest promise she had ever heard. And so, the woman once abandoned in the woods found not only shelter but love. She found 2 children who called her Ma with joy in their voices, and a husband who held her as though she were the most precious gift life had given him. The woods that had once echoed with her despair now carried her laughter, her hope, and the steady rhythm of an axe against wood, reminders that sometimes the family we lose only clears the path for the family we are meant to find.